The original of this video was published on September the 3rd and was taken down by YouTube, supposedly with a copyright violation. So I have updated and re-upped it so it has a bit more information in than what the original had. Hi folks, this is Tony for aminutetomidnight.com with another video update. As I record this, I'm feeling, well, quite annoyed in some ways at the fact of how we are being played and have been played by this whole COVID supposed pandemic, and I want to show you why it's becoming abundantly clear just how much this was planned and why and what they're using it for, and how we are really just guinea pigs as they push us into a great reset and their increased Agenda 2030 and climate change agenda. This was never really about a medical emergency. That's just the excuse that they've used to push us into this system that they've been planning for a long time, and it's a very convenient way of doing it to have this pandemic as the catalyst to get us where they wanted to go and have always wanted it to go. Now, I'm sure most of you who have followed this channel for any length of time will remember I've covered a number of times Event 201, which occurred last year, October 2019, a 3.5-hour pandemic tabletop exercise that simulated a series of dramatic scenario-based facilitated discussions confronting a difficult true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible pandemic. 15 global businesses, government and public health leaders were players in the simulation exercise that highlighted unresolved and real-world policy and economic issues that could be solved with sufficient political will, financial investment and attention now and in the future. And it basically was a run-through for the coronavirus that we have, this pandemic. Plain and simple, and it occurred before the pandemic supposedly began. And take a look at who was backed by Johns Hopkins and Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Centre for Health Security, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have big input into the whole vaccination thing, as we will see, and the World Economic Forum. And that is what I really want to cover in this video. The link here, look, the World Economic Forum, plain and simple, a sponsor and a backer of Event 201 late last year. Before I get into the World Economic Forum's input, which is the main thrust of this, I want to just play you a short clip of the weasel Bill Gates and something that he has said. And remember, he has big money invested in Moderna and this whole vaccine.
But you don't have a choice. People act like you have a choice. People don't feel like going to the stadium when they might get infected. You know, it's not the government who's saying, okay, just ignore this disease. And, you know, people are deeply affected by seeing these deaths, by knowing they could be part of the transmission chain, and old people, their parents, their grandparents could be affected by this. And so you don't get to say ignore what's going on here. There will be the ability, particularly in rich countries, to open up if things are done well over the next few months. But for the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
So there you go. It's plain and simple. They want everybody vaccinated, and you probably won't be able to buy or sell or get transported anywhere if you don't have their vaccine and their COVID identification. Now I want to look at the World Economic Forum, and this is on their website right now, The Great Reset.
Hello from the World Economic Forum in Geneva. My name is Adrian Monk, and I'll be moderating today's session. Welcome to this virtual meeting, which has brought together leaders and stakeholders from across the global community for our COVID Action Platform. Today, this meeting serves as a launch pad for the next chapter, the Great Reset. We have contributions from His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, from IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, and from many more in the next hour and a quarter. But to get us underway, let's hear from the forum's Executive Chairman and Founder, Professor Klaus Schwab.
Thank you, Adrian. It is obvious that we are in the midst of the most severe crisis the world has experienced since World War II. 75 years ago, countries and people came together to shape the post-war global order, which brought us decades of peace, increased global cooperation and prosperity to hundreds of millions of people around the world. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century.
And take note, he specifically mentioned 75 years since the Second World War. With his accent, Klaus Schwab reminds me of Adolf Hitler, not just because of his accent, but his mentioning of the Second World War and peace. The British were watching on, and Hitler had managed to bring unity to the German people.
History hangs in the balance at Nuremberg, and while the ranks of disciplined Nazis swing across the broad stadium, the man who holds the destiny of the German people in his hands still ponders his course. Nazism celebrates its triumphs and parades its amazing organization. Under the eye of Sir Neville Henderson, British ambassador, the legions of uniformed labor pass line upon line, carrying their shovels. Each man in this orderly multitude waits upon the Führer's word. But vast as it is, this huge assembly is only a fragment of his audience. Not Germany alone, but the whole world waits upon words and signs which will spell peace.
Now, as far as Klaus Schwab goes, he was born in Ravensburg in 1938, and that, of course, was in Hitler's Germany, which was a Nazi police state at the time. Well, here's some quotes from Schwab, who is, in fact, a transhumanist, and you should be able to see that through these quotes. They're taken from a book that he wrote called The Fourth Industrial Revolution in 2016. Consider the unlimited possibilities of having billions of people connected by mobile devices, giving the rise to unprecedented processing power, storage capabilities, and knowledge access. Or think about the staggering confluence of emerging technology breakthroughs covering wide-ranging fields such as artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, nanotechnology, biotechnology, materials science, energy storage, and quantum computing, to name a few. Many of those innovations are in their infancy, but they are already reaching an inflection point in their development as they build on and amplify each other in a fusion of technologies across the physical, digital, and biological worlds. And here's another couple of quotes. He also talks about online education involving the use of virtual and augmented reality to dramatically improve educational outcomes, and to sensors installed in homes, clothing and accessories, cities, transport and energy networks, and also smart cities with their all-important data platforms. All things will be smart and connected to the internet, says Schwab, and this will extend to animals as sensors wired in cattle can communicate to each other through a mobile phone network. And he loves the idea of smart cell factories, which would enable the accelerated generation of vaccines and big data technologies. There he ensures he will deliver new innovative ways to service citizens and customers, and we will have to stop objecting to businesses profiting from harnessing and selling information about every aspect of our personal lives. The mind-boggling innovations triggered by the Fourth Industrial Revolution, from biotechnology to AI, are redefining what it means to be human, says Schwab. Already advances in neurotechnologies and biotechnologies are forcing us to question what it means to be human. So that's just a few quotes that I have from the Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab, and you can find an article at offguardian.org entitled Klaus Schwab, the Great Fascist Reset, to see more about this. And by the way, when he talks about neural links and so on between cattle, you don't need to think too hard to realise that he's not talking about cows. Cattle, to people like Schwab, are human beings. Incidentally, I wonder how many of you remember the 2015 Economist magazine cover. The elites like to tell us cryptically what they're going to do. If you have a look here, you see Winston Churchill, and if you go down directly below Winston Churchill at the bottom, you will find two arrows, 11.5 and 11.3. 1 plus 1 plus 5 equals 7 or 70, that's a tall arrow. And then the second one, 1 plus 1 plus 3 equals 5, the short arrow, that's a 5, 75. 75 years since World War II. You also see a tortoise, which is a symbol for the Fabian socialist agenda, basically slow rolling out of socialism, which has occurred over a long period of time. And of course you also see Castrol and a very flat tyre on that car there, so I think that could be symbolic as well. But they've shown you through numerology or gematria the 75 there, 75 years since Second World War. And of course 2015 was 75 years since the dropping of the atomic bomb, and you can see that up above as well, the atomic bomb. And of course we see Alice from Alice in Wonderland and possibly the Queen's Land Rover.
It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system for the need for the post-corona era. We have a choice to remain passive, which would lead to the amplification of many of the trends we see today: polarization, nationalism, racism, and ultimately increased social unrest and conflicts. But we have another choice. We can build a new social contract, particularly integrating the next generation. We can change our behavior to be in harmony with nature again. And we can make sure that the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are best utilized to provide us with better lives. In short, we need a great reset. We have to mobilize all constituents of our global society to work together. We must not miss this unique window of opportunity. For this reason, I'm grateful that we are joined for this announcement of the Great Reset Initiative, not only by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, but by representatives of international organizations, business, trade unions, scientists, and above all, the young generation. Now we have the very special message from the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
So now we have the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He will also deliver the same old tired climate change and Agenda 2030 argument, why we need a great reset, again showing that this COVID was just basically a setup. And I will just edit this and shorten it somewhat, but hopefully you'll get the picture.
Your Royal Highness, Professor Schwab, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I send you my warmest greetings and best wishes on the launch of the Great Reset. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing enormous human suffering and economic hardship. A microscopic virus has closed down entire countries and economies. In doing so, it has exposed the fragility that characterizes much of our world. But this fragility is not confined to health systems. runaway climate change, unsustainable levels of inequality, and the lawlessness of cyberspace are all warning signs that we must heed. The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. As you rightly say, it is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world. The scale of the pandemic and its social and economic impact demands strong unity and solidarity, particularly towards developing countries. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
Bingo, folks. There it is. The real reason why airplanes are grounded and people are locked down. Zero carbon emissions. That's what they want. So if you're thinking, folks, that airplanes are going to be back in the air the way they were before, think again. What these people want is to shut this all down for a Gaia-worshipping world with zero carbon emissions.
We have already called for an economic stimulus package equivalent to a double-digit percentage, more than 10% of the global economy. Last week, the United Nations, together with the governments of Jamaica and Canada, convened the largest gathering of world leaders since the start of the pandemic to lay solid foundations for a sustainable recovery based on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement.
The COVID-19 pandemic is a thinly veiled excuse to push the world into Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 policies, plain and simple. And now we're going to hear from Prince Charles with a bunch of royal nonsense about COVID-19 and quickly morphing into climate change and why the Great Reset is so important to save our planet, basically.
These are unprecedented times. Every person on the planet has been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Our world came to a standstill, and it became clear that we did not have the answer or the mechanisms to address such an unprecedented global threat. The threats posed by this dreadful pandemic came upon us suddenly with very little warning. The threat of climate change has been more gradual, but its devastating reality for many people and their livelihoods around the world, and its ever greater potential to disrupt, surpasses even that of COVID-19, which is why we need to restore balance with the natural world through decisive action on climate change and restoring biodiversity. If we look at the planet as if it were a patient, we can see that our activities have been damaging her immune system, and she has been struggling to function and thrive due to the strain we have put on her vital organs. To treat her, we need to restore balance and put nature back at the center of the circle. And to achieve this, we must act for health and well-being, understand nature's patterns and cycles, recognize the value of diversity, unity, and the interdependence of all living things, consider the importance of innovation and adaptation, and invest in nature-based solutions to help stimulate a more circular bioeconomy that gives back to nature as much as we take from her. The 75 years after the Second World War saw unprecedented growth, rising longevity, and poverty reductions. But all this put an overwhelming strain on our environment. The good news is that we have many of the solutions to hand. We must redesign systems and pathways to advance net zero transitions globally. And in this regard, carbon pricing can form a critical pathway to genuinely sustainable markets. This reset moment is our opportunity to accelerate and align our efforts to create truly global momentum. We have a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis. Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to big visions of change. And global crises like pandemics and climate change know no borders and highlight just how interdependent we are as one people sharing one planet. I've been encouraged to see the growing calls for a green recovery. We need only look to the United Nations Secretary General, to the IMF, the EU, the Petersburg Climate Dialogue, the Canadian government, the COP26 Universities Network, and business leaders around the world to see this. And as we move from rescue to recovery, therefore, we have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Notice how Prince Charles again in that speech mentioned the 75 years since World War II and clearly spoke about this all being a green agenda. COVID-19 plays perfectly into the Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 politics and policies of the United Nations. And now we're going to hear from Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF.
Kristalina, tell us what the Great Reset means to you and what you will do about it.
Well, thank you very much. And from the bottom of my heart, many thanks to His Royal Highness and to Professor Schwab for bringing us together. Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis. And now is the time for all of us to define our own role. Will history say that was the great reversal? And we actually today see very worrisome signs. 170 countries are going to finish this year with a smaller economy than they started. And we already project that there will be more debt, more deficit, more unemployment, and there is a very high risk of more inequality and more poverty unless we act. And that takes me to what is it that would make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset.
Here we go again, folks. The great opportunity for reset. That is what this COVID-19 is. It's a manufactured crisis, the purpose of which is to reset and reimagine the world and recreate it in the image that the elites want. I'm not saying that there isn't a COVID-19 virus or that it doesn't kill some people, but that's not what the real global crisis is. It's not a pandemic. It is a systemic overtaking of everything by the elites' Agenda 2030, the United Nations and others to get us where they want us to go. And make no mistake, things are not going to go back to the way they were before.
From the perspective of the IMF, what we see is inevitably a very massive injection of fiscal stimulus to help countries deal with this crisis and shift gear for growth to return. But it is paramount that this growth leads to a greener, smarter, and more fairer world in the future.
There we have it again, the pivotal point, the purpose of all of this, low carbon. Pushing the man-made climate change theory and using COVID-19 as a catalyst to cement the UN's Sustainable Development Agenda. Carbon taxes will be pushed even harder now, I'll betcha.
We can put in place public investments and incentives for private investments into low carbon and climate resilient growth.
And now we see the next main goal of the pandemic, and that is to push us into a digital currency when the global economy collapses.
I'm particularly keen to take advantage of the low oil prices today to eliminate harmful subsidies and to bring in place carbon price as an incentive for the investments for the future. Secondly, we know the digital economy is the big winner of this crisis.
There is much more in the World Economic Forum video, but I'll leave you to watch it if you want. Remember, it's well over an hour long. Now let's turn our attention briefly to Pope Francis. His pushing of the very same UN agenda. Here he was on September the 1st, 2020, parroting the Agenda 2030 narrative. Pope Francis, the pandemic has given us a chance to develop new ways of living. The coronavirus pandemic has given us a chance to develop new ways of living, Pope Francis said in a message released by the Vatican on September the 1st, in which he reiterated his call to limit global average temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius and for the cancellation of the debt of the most vulnerable countries in recognition of the severe impacts of the medical, social and economic crisis they face as a result of COVID-19. The Pope said the COVID-19 pandemic has in some ways given us a chance to develop new ways of living. Indeed, already we can see how the earth can recover if we allow it to rest. The air becomes cleaner, the water's clearer, the animals have returned to many places from where they had previously disappeared. Speaking of the need to restore the land, Francis insisted that climate restoration is of utmost importance since we are in the midst of a climate emergency and are running out of time. What about the actual COVID-19 virus? Just how deadly is it? Does it warrant global lockdowns? Why the rush for a vaccine, without which we are told that life will never go back to normal? Take a look at this, a recent CDC report. New CDC report shows that 94% of COVID-19 deaths in the US had contributing conditions. The Centre for Disease Control and Prevention released new data last week that depicts how many Americans have died from COVID-19 also had underlying other conditions. According to the report, only 6% of the deaths have COVID-19 as the only cause mentioned, revealing that 94% of patients who died from coronavirus also had other health conditions and contributing causes. And actually, I looked, as well as that, I looked at Pennsylvania government website yesterday. There have been 7,712 total deaths attributed to COVID-19. Out of the total deaths, 5,213 have occurred in residents from nursing or personal care facilities, and most of the patients hospitalised are 65 years or older, and most of the deaths have occurred in patients 65 years or older. So do we need to be locking down the world for this? How about New Zealand? With all the new supposed cases, we still only have 22 deaths, and every one of those was an old person with underlying medical conditions. Sweden, hardly any people dying now. So I'll leave you to question just how appropriate are these lockdown measures and forcing people to wear masks and so forth. And then look at this. Urgent request sent to states in push for coronavirus vaccine delivery by November 1st. Dr. Robert Redfield, Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, sent a letter last week to the nation's governors with an urgent request. The Trump administration wanted them to do everything in their power to eliminate hurdles for vaccine distribution sites to be fully operational by November 1st. The August 27th letter obtained by McClatchy asked governors to fast-track permits and licenses for new distribution sites. The normal time required to obtain these permits presents a significant barrier to the success of this urgent public health program, Redfield wrote. CDC urgently requests your assistance in expediting applications for these distribution facilities, he continued, and, if necessary, asks that you consider waiving requirements that would prevent these facilities from becoming fully operational by November 1st, 2020. And this, folks, is under Donald Trump. Those of you that think Trump was anti-vaccination, think hard again.
One final message from me. This morning I spent some time signing out correspondence, as we do as ministers, and I will have to say I was alarmed at the number of letters that I've received from people concerned that the government would be making COVID-19 vaccinations compulsory. This is a direct result of deliberate misinformation that's being spread through social media. The government is not making COVID-19 or any other vaccinations compulsory. We will, of course, when we have a vaccination available, be encouraging people to take the vaccination because it will help to keep everybody safe. But the government is not going to be making the vaccination compulsory.
Folks, we have the massive rushing for the deployment of a vaccine, and though governments will say, no, we aren't going to make it mandatory, though some state governments, etc., state governors are saying they would make it mandatory, but others are saying, like the New Zealand minister here, saying that they wouldn't make it mandatory. But you don't have to make it mandatory to have the vaccine to make it so that everyone will have to pretty much take it. All you have to do is tell people that they can't buy or sell or travel without the vaccine. Yeah, we won't make you take it, but you won't be able to do this, this and this unless you take it. It will eventually yield the same result.
Not only on financial success, but how they contribute to our environmental health, to social cohesion, and exercise good governance. That's only one aspect. So to answer your question related to Davos, we will now start a quite high number of task forces to look at all the different issues, and we will present all those ideas to the people assembled in Davos, to the leaders from business and from the political community. But at the same time, we will make Davos very different, very open. We will mobilize our 10,000 global shapers in over 400 cities around the world to organize a twin summit and to interact continuously with those assembled in Davos to ensure that we do not fall back to old recipes, but that we really look at forward-oriented solutions.
So these things are being rushed through. We have this great reset being rushed through to change the world into the image of the elite, what they want, and I believe a depopulation agenda with it, but that's not going to be in the scope of this video. Folks, things are rushing very quickly towards the culmination of, well, I think what the book of Revelation talks about, the beast system arising, and it is arising very quickly. We need to make sure our hearts are right with God, do what we can to prepare, and just be wise to what is really going on. That's about all I want to share in this video. Please visit our website aminutetomidnight.com, and all of our videos, you can find them there in archives. We do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. I want to say a big thank you to people that help us. We could not keep this running without your help, and you can donate at the website if you want to help keep this going. That's it for this episode. It's Tony saying goodbye now, and hopefully we'll be back in a few days with another update.